I realize how futile it is to try to solve the problem and reconnect if I'm not in a place where I can actually enter into love. I would enter in like, okay, let's resolve this thing, but I was actually energetically, I was closed off, like in my heart.
You can't solve the problem in the state of consciousness you have the problem in. I saw this very early in ayahuasca in my early 20s, that I would be in this space and I'd try to talk with somebody and fix it, and I couldn't. And then I'd go drink ayahuasca and I'd go into an altered state. I could solve it in there and then come back to the person in a completely different state, now open, like you're saying, and then it would get solved. Hi, and welcome back to the Blue Morpho podcast. I'm your host, Maestro Hamilton Souther, and I am here with Sabri, Gazail. It's a pleasure, Sabri, to have you here, brother. How's it going?
Yeah, good, thanks. Beautiful weekend. Had a nice little trip out yesterday. And yeah, doing good, apart from the little hamstring tear that I mentioned before we started. A reoccurring thing, but in good spirits about it.
Well, we just came off an epic conversation on your podcast about what matters, and I want to continue that theme of what matters, if anything matters at all. And so, what matters most for you?
What a good question. The first things that come up is my relationship to myself, my relationship to God. They're the first things that immediately come to mind, followed by then how I show up to my family, my partner, my daughter. And then my mission, purpose, and I guess how I see my position, my place in the world, my reason for being here, I would say. So yeah, in that kind of order: relationship to self, relationship to God, maybe the other way around, really, and then how I show up.
It's really interesting to mention God. A lot of people are scared of that word now and don't want to give matter, like the matter of their body, to that word. They don't want to mention it and say it. When you say that, what is the meaning for you behind that word?
Yeah, it's interesting, really, because I would say up until 8 years ago, I was a pretty staunch atheist. And in fact, I was just talking about this earlier. You know, the first time I sat with ayahuasca was within an hour, there was just this deepest realization of, like in that moment, it went from like always thinking there's no God, no God, no God, to I get it. That God that I didn't believe in doesn't exist, but I get what it is now. And since then, I've really developed a deep connection and feeling to this cosmic force that I do feel in me, through me, around me. And I feel like, let me try and get the words for this. Let me just drop in. If I really separate from, if we would say lowercase s, self, and move beyond my own, what feels like beyond my own body, I feel like I can receive guidance and wisdom, and sometimes in a way where it might be the complete opposite thing of what I was thinking. Sometimes if I feel that I'm in an activated or triggered state, I can go to that place and I get the exact words of wisdom that I need to receive. And whether that's already in me, but it's in a different place, or if it's exists in, through, and as, or all around, and I'm able to draw in that. And the reason I say that's one of the most important things to me is because I trust it. I've found over the years now it's become very trustable, and has guided me through things in ways that have really been hugely beneficial. So I guess that's what it means to me.
That's a beautiful meaning. I love it that, you go from atheist, which is not believing that there's anything. And I've always thought that, once I met God through ayahuasca as well, I didn't have a framework or reference for God before ayahuasca. So just to preface, I love the idea that you also didn't have a framework for it. And I just didn't know. I wasn't even willing to commit to agnostic. I was like, I don't know, like it doesn't, how would I know? Like it was where I was before. and that you through that had this transformative experience where something else became palpable and real for you. I had a similar experience. I was hanging off the rafters of a building in a Maloka in ayahuasca, screaming to the ceiling, God, 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 until there was no ceiling, there was no roof, there was no nothing, and there was just presence. And I went, oh. And it wasn't anything that anyone had ever believed in. It was what allowed anything to be believed. And I thought that about, the nature of atheism and the bounty of this concept that we're working with, that we're calling God, which is beyond any religious philosophy or beyond any way anyone has ever articulated it, right? But so many of us through these experiences, especially ayahuasca, have tapped into it, and it becomes something that is not only real for us, it's obvious and was always there beforehand. And I just have thought about it that, that presence allows us, it has so much generosity. It allows us to use it to create the atheist. It allows us to use it to create the doubt and indecision around the agnostic. It allows us to be the believer or the one to have faith in something that may or may not be true for that period of time, but it is constant. It is a constant, like gravity is in our life. Like, that's one of the things I loved when I found gravity in a sensorial sense, was like, there's always gravity. I'm in the airplane, there's gravity. I'm underwater, there I can feel it. I'm in the chair, I feel it. And then that's what I felt like about this presence. And I also used the term God. It was obvious that that term was the original term to describe what, in our language, in English, to describe that phenomena we were talking about.
Yeah. It's funny because I feel like whenever I talk about God, I have to preface to people, I don't mean a man in the sky with a beard. Because I feel like for so many people, that's the image they have. And, it's really interesting because my daughter's mom and I, we separated when she was 1, and we co-parent pretty well. My daughter's 7 now. And recently she was asking about God. And her mum's position is God isn't real. And that's what she tells her. And my position is, yeah, God is absolutely real. And I said, what do you think? She said, I think God is real. I feel like I can feel God. I said, yeah. I said, incredible. I said, so can I. And then I have to have a conversation with her mum, and her mum's saying, like, I don't think we should be telling her God's real. I said, well, first of all, I like so much of my life, because she doesn't really know that much about what my life is like now compared to when I was with her, which was, almost 7 years ago. A lot has changed. And I said, you're okay to tell her about Santa and the Tooth Fairy, and that those things are real. I said, what's the issue with God? And it's just funny how so many people can be so activated or triggered by that word. So I always feel like I have to preface, I don't mean that God when I talk to people about it. But that word, I feel like we kind of need to reclaim it, really. I feel like we need to reclaim God. I feel like we need to reclaim the word religion, and to be okay with those things, and not for them to have to mean what they maybe once meant. Because I think so many people were right to not believe in that God. And I think that's where I got to. It was more like, that God that I'm being told about, that doesn't feel right to me. I don't believe in that. And then realizing, okay. So it should be, rather than that doesn't sound right, God doesn't exist, maybe it should be, that doesn't sound right, so what is God?
I like the idea of challenging God and challenging our understandings. I think a lot of people are rebelling now against an institution, as if the institution could have ever had the right to define what God was. It would think, in my mind, that again, inside out, you would think God has to represent something so much greater than anyone's religion to describe it. And so the principle couldn't sit within religion. Religions would maybe focus on it or about it, but not be it. And in my mind, if I were rebelling against the nature of a religion, I wouldn't be rebelling against God. I would be rebelling against the container that anyone had tried to ever put around that. And I think that that's been muddied. And in doing so, we've lost the ability to just accept the terms, maybe to have a meaning beyond the way we were propagandized or taught to believe in the meanings themselves.
Yeah, it feels like we have to liberate the term.
Yeah, I call it being syllabically challenged. I'll tell people on retreat, I go, look, I'm not challenged by these syllables. These are syllables. Like, what's a word? A word can come from a syllable or multi-syllable. So word, one syllable, God, one syllable. What's the point of that? It's a sound. It's a symbol for something. And I'm not asking somebody to believe in that thing. I'm asking somebody to recognize that we have at least a word or a symbol, and it's pointing to something. It might be pointing, in the case of like God, to what I think of as everything. You know, what I loved about ayahuasca and you know, these kinds of sacred plant ceremonies is that you weren't asked to believe in something to have an experience. You just had to show up to have an experience and see if it affected your beliefs.
Yeah.
Right? And it didn't require a buy-in other than the willingness to go and have the experience. Like, it wasn't even like I had to be told it's a good movie or a bad movie or a 3-star movie. It's just like, hey, show up and have an experience and you tell me what happened. And out of it, a really whelming number of people would come out of it and say something to the equivalent of, I saw God, or I met God, or I met spirit, or I met, you know, supernatural something. There's that quality to it that, you know, is just in essence larger than the normal bubble of life.
Yeah. So my relationship to God, relationship to self, how I show up to my family, then how I show up to the wider world. I would say they're the things that seem to matter the most to me. And if those things are in order and in check, then I feel pretty good.
How does self show up? What's that relationship for you?
There's maybe a bit of a paradox in that, because I feel like part of it is through the I feel like the more there's like a deepening of the relationship with myself, and through doing that, it's the relinquishing the idea of myself. Very often, I feel like those two often go hand in hand. And when I have periods of going deep in, you know, my partner Colette, she was in the States for like 5 weeks, and in that time, I really did some deep reflective work, because I felt like that time on my own really allowed for it. And just the further I went in, the more it was just recognizing how much of me is just an idea of me. Just so much of me is just an idea. And the more I could let go of that, the more it actually opened up to the infinite possibility of who I could be when I let go of the idea of who I think I am. And there's a huge liberation in that, to realize I think I'm this, and because I think I'm this, then every day when I wake up, there's a certain number of things that I could do based upon the idea of who I think I am. But what if I woke up and I did this, and really opened the spectrum to realize that beyond any of the idea of who I think I am, there's this infinite potential and possibility that I could tap into outside the idea of me. So beyond that, beyond the limits of my memory of myself, then what happens? And I feel like when I enter into that, I feel most empowered in a way, most limitless, most boundless, most free, and also most free to show up. And I sometimes wonder if that's the attraction of travel for people, because they're not known in a certain place. You can kind of travel, you can kind of like show up as whoever you want, and people will believe you, because why would they not? So it's almost like there's a more of a freeing thing. Like sometimes when you're around your family, they remember you from when you were at whatever age, and they kind of treat you that way. And sometimes people, I think, then fall into the pattern of, oh, I've got to be the person my family think I am, as an example. So yeah, paradoxically, I think when I think about focus on the relationship with myself, it's actually partly freeing myself from the idea of myself.
Yeah, when I played with that, I like to think that first I have a thought of myself, and that thought is intoxicating and really powerful. And then I realize I'm the thinker. I go, wait a second, I'm the thinker. I'm actually the one thinking of myself as a self-reflective and self-fulfilling prophecy. Like I can think of myself, I can be self-reflective. And then as a thinker, it kind of leads me to this much deeper question. Well, like if I am myself, if I am thinking and I can think of myself, what does that actually make me? Who am I? What am I? Like, how did that ever happen? How did any of that ever happen? If I'm not just pinging around in the thought of myself, trying to deal with myself, how did I ever become a thinker to begin with? And I think it has to matter. Like if you don't matter, I don't think anything matters. I think that the kind of the ego wants to commandeer that position, right? And a lot of people become fixated and stuck in ego about that. And they now great over importance for it. But I think that's the moment, if you don't do that, where you realize that you really do matter and you have a purpose and there's something much greater about yourself.
Yeah. You know, when you were saying that about the thoughts, there's something that I'll grab this quickly. I wrote it down, and I'm going to remind myself as I say it, because it was around thoughts. I was in thought around the nature of thoughts, and but one of the things that I was considering was that am I thinking my thoughts, or am I entering into a level of consciousness that attunes with a quality of thought that belongs to the field of thought? And depending on where I am, that's the thoughts that actually enter me. So, for example, if I'm feeling angry, like angry thoughts are going to enter. But if I'm in like a state of like full, open-hearted, blissful love, not in the transaction of love, but in the beingness of love, it's almost impossible to have an angry thought. Like I can try and have one, but it's like I can't locate it. So I was just thinking, even then, it's like am I the thinker of the thought, or am I the receiver of the thought, depending on what state I'm in, that I'm attuning to the field of thought that I am now able to open up to receive and to transmit?
Yeah. At that point, it's like big hall of mirrors opens up. And is that mine? Do I own it? And am I the sole creator of that thing in a vacuum from all the rest of thought? Or is thought part of a greater field? Right? Like, is there a greater field of thought? Is there like a collective mind and we're nodes of that mind? And it's filled with all the potential thoughts. And we tap into that and we become a channel for it. That's what we used to call spirits in ayahuasca, like your own spirits. The indigenous people would say, oh, those are spirits. Those aren't thoughts, like the angry ones. And the blissful ones and the joyful ones, they would actually call those thought matrices spirits. And they would say, oh, you took on the angry spirits. And you'd have to purge the angry spirits. And when you did, then you would feel good and you wouldn't be angry anymore. And they treated it like there was a big matrix of this, and that those would go and new ones would come and you would then think differently. So there is some evidence to represent an idea that while we're thinking, the egoic identification of, oh, those are my thoughts, that's me creating those thoughts, might actually just be an orientation of that phenomena. And there actually is a much bigger creative mind out there.
Yeah. When I was in contemplation around that, it was quite illuminating. And I was just thinking, maybe the only thing, and this is where I really landed with this idea of relationship with self, is where is my level of consciousness in any given moment, which attunes me to a certain place of the quality of thought I can have, because the quality of thought is going to affect my feelings, emotions, behaviors, actions. So it felt like maybe the place of self-mastery is to allow myself to enter into a certain state, frequency, vibration, and then from that place, maybe everything else starts to kind of self-balance.
It's very attuned with like the Eastern philosophical meditative concepts. And this morning I was working on the facilitator course for the Academy and going into the body as a matrix of matter, but also this phenomena of consciousness, and in consciousness, it being what's called the rainbow bridge. This idea that there's a chakra column and kundalini, and there's this auric field, and that the body is in a morphogenetic field. And in things like ayahuasca and psilocybin, it looks like a great geometric patterning. And in Yaqui philosophy, like Carlos Castaneda and Don Juan, it's a luminous egg. There's different ways that it gets described, but the way you're describing that is that part of you shifts in consciousness. And then because of that, all your thinking, all your feeling, all your processing is different. And then the way you perceive reality is different. I think that's very spot on, because at least for me, what's like the dominant visual context that I relate to in my experience, like seeing the wall and the art around me or whatever, I do understand as a synthesis in my mind. And depending on my vibrational state, really does limit the nature of the experience that I'm having. So when I'm in a real down place, or it's really hard, or I'm really suffering in some way, I don't have the other thoughts. It seems like it comes hand in hand. It's all kind of one complete picture.
Yeah, and this was really highlighted to me. If I was to have like a disagreement with my partner, or we have some type of fallout or lack of attunement within the relationship, it might not even be anything major. In fact, it really never is. But I realize how futile it is to try to solve the problem and reconnect if I'm not in a place where I can actually enter into love, because I can actually only get as high as understanding. And what I noticed was that I would enter in like, okay, let's resolve this thing, but I was actually energetically I was closed off, like in my heart, because like I may have felt like some type of pain, maybe some type of fear, some type of hurt, whatever it is. So I'm more closed off and like I'm going into let me understand. But it's like that nothing was getting fixed either way for us, because it was at the level of the minds. And it was like, oh yeah, it's pretty futile to try to enter back into a loving place when I'm actually have not entered into a space of lovingness before I then go and try to talk. So, just realizing that, just taking that time to go inward, to navigate what I need to release any fear, which is ultimately lies. What lies do I need to release? What truth do I need to enter into, so I can open up, and now I can go and have a conversation from a place of actually desiring intimacy, connection, love, and to really receive and to feel, and not just to have myself be heard. And how much of a difference it makes just changing that one thing has been really powerful.
Yeah, we used to say, or I used to like to say, that you can't solve the problem in the state of consciousness you have the problem in. I saw this very early in ayahuasca in my early 20s, that I would be in this space and I'd try to talk with somebody and fix it, and I couldn't. And then I'd go drink ayahuasca and I'd go into an altered state. I could solve it in there and then come back to the person in a completely different state, now open, like you're saying, and then it would get solved. And I think that that's really tying into that idea that we have this field and we're part of this field. And when the field is closed off, no matter how hard we try mentally or logically to solve one of these things, we can't do it. I also found this to be a great lesson associated with anger and anger management. I said, don't go have a conversation angry. If you're angry, go to the nature. Nature, Mother Earth, is the only thing big enough to handle your anger. Go get it out there. Go to a place where you're finally totally neutral about it, and then come back and address the source of whatever caused you to be angry in the first place. I see so many people try to approach conversations while they're still triggered. And I think all that does is give somebody an opportunity to churn in the mind about it.
Yeah. And it's almost like, if you do go and try and have a conversation from a place of anger, it relies on willpower, which it's like hanging on the edge of a cliff. It's like, it doesn't matter how hard you try, eventually it's going to go. And if you're in a state of anger, having a conversation, so often it's only a matter of time before that anger gets expressed in the conversation. If you're constantly trying to hold it down, so like, okay, I want to resolve this, but I've got all this anger that I'm feeling, and I'm trying my best to suppress the anger. You're only ever a moment away from the person saying something that is just the right thing that allows it to come out.
I wonder, when we deal with ourselves in this, like we say, okay, God matters and self matters, and the way that we show up matters, which is, what we're talking about right now. I wonder how much of that work somebody has to do for themselves first about that relationship with self. I think it's really easy to externalize that somebody else has a problem or is a problem. And I wonder how much of that anger is really, I'm angry with myself, I'm sad with myself, I'm upset with myself. I've been, hurting myself, or I've traumatized myself, or I'm not treating myself in that loving way. For you, how do you go from I've become negative about myself to finding that neutrality in heart and that kind of reset for your own self?
Yeah, I think part of it is actually being able to access the strength that is required to be vulnerable. Because for a lot of people, let's say, when triggered or activated, maybe anger is the predominant state that they go to, and maybe they take more of a warrior position, which appears to be stronger. But really, the thing that I usually needs addressing is actually someplace where I'm hurt, someplace where I feel pain or fear. I feel rejected. I feel like I'm not enough. It brings up these fears that I've had since I was this age, and it's actually something I've always tried to avoid. But in order to actually enter into the vulnerability to deeply look at that, I think it requires real strength. It actually requires the fullness of the warrior. So I might be going into this warrior energy, but it's usually like a pseudo warrior energy where I come up, like it's anger that's there. It's like, no, let's actually take the noble warrior's energy that needs the strength that is required to allow me to fully go vulnerably into where I'm actually hurt, what it is I'm not wanting to look at or feel, and allow myself to see it. Where is it I've actually rejected myself? What is it that I maybe am angry at that other person that they may have said or done that is pointing to something that I don't want to look at, that I actually believe about myself. But it feels like that requires strength and humility. And I think humility, the ego, humility, humiliation. I think the ego sees humility as humiliation. But I think it requires a huge amount of strength. And if I can be humble enough to go and see those things, and I feel like I guess I've got to a point where I'm okay going looking at that. And if I do feel anger, it's like, okay, maybe I need to go and sit and get to the point where I enter into sadness and tears run down my face, and I sit with myself, and then actually let me look for the truth, because there's a lie there. There's a lie that is activating that. So I need to go and see the lie and then enter into the truth that sets me free. That's the way I kind of see it. And I guess I've got okay with that process now, and I'm blessed that the relationship that I'm in, we hold that for each other as well, without any kind of judgment around that. In fact, it's actually celebrated. Not that that's the nature of the relationship, but if the person finds that there's the space for the person to discover who they are and also to discover who they're not. And I think that's been really, really powerful.
Yeah, it's incredible to look at the nature of ego, especially at humiliation versus humility. And I think humility is really that incredible neutral point. In ayahuasca ceremonies, I would see that people would try to not be humiliated. And so they would either be arrogant and boastful more, or actually diminish themselves from what they were. And the actual humble place was just, it is exactly as it is, and it's okay the way that it is. And once we could find that place, like, it's okay however you're feeling, it's okay however you're showing up in this moment, it's exactly how it needs to be. And because of that, it allows us to now change or evolve or make a pivot in that moment, because we found that place of humility. And I think that's a deep lesson for us to take in, that it's okay to be humble in the neutrality of something, including if somebody just won something and is a total champion, to celebrate the fact that they won something as a champion isn't boastfulness. That's actually just the humble truth in that moment. That's exactly what it was. That was a big win for that person.
That's a really good point, and probably one that gets missed is that sometimes it requires a level of humility to lower, but actually sometimes it requires humility to lift, and that's something that I've done. Like my natural position is to downplay my position, and not even consciously, just unconsciously. And anything I've done in the past where I've been actually, now I could look back and be like, I was really good at that, or like, and at the time I so often just couldn't see it. And I feel like for me sometimes actually it's the humility. Like, can I be humble enough to say I'm actually really good at this? And I find that harder.
Well, I wonder about that. Like, I wonder where we get those, traits. I was in a lecture yesterday talking about self-sabotage and self-sabotaging patterns that we create and pick up ourselves. And,
Yeah.
The way we treat ourselves matters. So the relationship we have to ourselves matters, but also the way we treat ourselves. We not only do we treat others a certain way, and that has an impact on our lives, but the way we treat ourselves really matters. And I see that a lot of people cut themselves down and actually use their mind in a diminishing kind of way. And it's humble to be just factual about also all your great talents and everything else that you have that are real successes in our lives, and not trying to have to, play up over a kind of internal wound, but just sit positively in everything that is, that's your strengths or your talents or what you're really good at.
Yeah. It's amazing how it shows up, like how the ego can be both inflating and deflating, and it requires humility for both to stop the hyperinflation, to stop the deflation. Yeah.
And treating people certain ways, I found it's really important in relationship building, both to find honesty and an integrity in that, and to feel comfortable in that. And then, to also realize that the way I treat myself is also reflective of the way I treat others. And the way we treat other people also, I think, matters in our lives.
Oh, yeah. So much. Yeah. Like, hugely. Hugely.
How have you found that being a parent? Like, how has it been? Like, we're talking about things that matter. And I think, making another human being is a thing that also incredibly matters, but it also creates that relationship. And the moment you become a parent, you have the reflection of yourself, and you have a new role and archetype, like now you're father or mother. And you also have the being that now has matter. And there they are. But they're their own being. But they're also a bit of an extension of you too. And that matters. That there's this thing. And then everything you do has some kind of impact on them as well. And that matters to them. That's how we got our whole childhood story, and the goods and the bads and the traumas, stories that people carry around with them too. How has all of that impacted you?
Yeah, a lot. I've always tried to be really conscious, and honest to myself, honest in my struggles as a parent, honest with my daughter. And again, to be in that place of humility. She's really has a really high level of emotional intelligence. She's very empathetic. She's very thought out and caring, and she's got a good degree of like critical thinking for her age. And I would always just try to be honest with her when I would mess up, when I would lose my temper, when I would, like, if I'd shout at her and it wasn't reasonable or called for, I would sit her down after and say, darling, I said that was nothing to do with you, and that was everything to do with me. Like, yes, you're doing that thing. I said, but how I reacted, that's not because of you, that's because of me. And so, and usually any of those times that it would happen, it was either like at a time where I was like working in a space where I was like doing a lot, or like, I was underslept, and like there's a load of other things going on. And I would say that, and I would say, I'm really sorry, and I shouldn't have shouted like that, but I don't want you to think that was you. That was me, and I've got to work on these things. And I'll say to her, sometimes as children, we think our parents have all the answers. So when they do things, we think, oh, like that they must have done that because that's the right thing. I said that is not the case. I said that wasn't the right thing, and I want you to know that I do try my best, and sometimes I make mistakes. And just whilst you're learning as a child, I'm learning as well. and I commit to trying to be better. And I've had those kind of conversations with her since she was about 3. And what's interesting is how much she doesn't hold anything. It's like in that moment you see her kind of just energetically, you see her go, and she goes, "That's okay, Daddy." And she'll put arms around me, she'll give me a kiss. And it's like she's been absolved of the thing. Whereas like I can remember being a kid where something like that would happen. It'd be like, "Now look what you made me do." So it's like, oh, so now you lost your temper and it's because of me.
You put it back on you too.
So I always try to show up as, best I can, but in the times that I haven't, it's just, can I just be honest? Because whilst right now I might take the position of she's my child, but at some point she's not going to be my child. She might be my adult, but she's not going to be my child. And I think sometimes people forget that, okay, so now I have a relationship with a 7-year-old, and that's different to the relationship I had with a 3-year-old, and it's going to be different to the 10-year-old, the 15-year-old. But at some point, there's maybe going to be a relationship between a 70-year-old and a 55-year-old. And that's going to be a very different relationship. So rather than just seeing her as my child, it's realizing that there's another human here that I'm going to evolve with. She's going to evolve with me. Our relationship's going to evolve all the way. And can I look at her uniqueness and not just see her as mine, this thing that's mine, but as this person, and to try to go into that like honestly and vulnerably and openly, and to look at, like what have I got to work on myself here? Because if this thing is bringing frustration to me, what is it? It's just another layer of that, which is amazing. Like it is amazing. And I think if you can try to approach it consciously and not be in the shame of making mistakes or whatever that means, but being human, I think it can be an amazing opportunity to really create a deep relationship and to grow.
That's an incredible relationship. And to have the forthright awareness to be honest about that, I think most parents don't have the humility that we're talking about. And they're actually in the self-humiliation over having lost their temper or behaved in a way that they wish they hadn't and can't get out of it. So like in the example you give, blame happens next, like when the parent says, look what you made me do, right? Yeah. And I think there's something so potent in this for us about action and reaction. What I've realized from the shamanic work and the ceremonial work is I don't have to react to what's going on in the ceremony around me. And in like normal societal interactions, I see that it's like a chain reaction. Like something happens, someone reacts. From someone's reaction, someone else reacts. And it's like there's a chain reaction, literally reaction going on between everybody. And they don't even know how to stop that a lot of times. And a lot of times it's not positive reaction at all. It ends up being quite difficult. And I like the idea that you could just stop that by just saying like, I stop. I don't have to react to anything. I have agency. Mm-hmm. I have agency. I might be triggered, but I need to deal with it with myself. I don't have to continue whatever it is that's going on around me. And I could choose exactly how I react. And I know that it's odd in like a normal societal conversation, but in an ayahuasca ceremony, you just go blank. Like chaos is going on out there and you just look at it like, I'm not going to react. I'm going to choose my action about how I'm going to intervene and deal with this. I'm not going to let that go on forever, but at least for a second or two, I don't have to be in the chain reaction of that whole thing. I'm just going to stop, look at that thing, and I'm going to start to get clear in my mind. Okay, how am I actually going to address this in a way that is most helpful? And I share with people, you could take this actually into your own societal settings. Like someone says something to you that would trigger you and you immediately would want to like come back at that thing. You don't have to at all. You can just stop and be like, yeah, that's what that person just said. Mm-hmm. Yep, that's what they did. Sometimes we get overwhelmed emotionally and stuff and we can't do that. But I think being able to gain that space and that perspective is really important. That's something we can practice.
Yeah, definitely. I'll share one more story on the parenting because it felt very powerful. A year ago, maybe that was the last time I felt like I had one of those kind of moments. I remember it was February. I'd had this. I was going through like a particularly stressful period, and I felt my nervous system was just on edge. And I'd been fine. I had my daughter, and I'd recently taken the child lock off the door because she was at an age where she got it. She was 6. And we were driving. Now, habitually, she was playing with the door handle because she's used to the child lock being on. Even though we'd had the conversation about not opening the door, she'd got it. She was playing with it. Anyway, the door swung open whilst I was driving. I was already like on this like super edgy state, and I just lost my shit for 3 seconds, maybe, right? And then I got to where we were going. I pulled up, and I was like, oh. I said, darling, I said, I'm sorry. And she said, bless her, she went, it's all right, Daddy. I know you're stressed, and I know you didn't mean it. It's okay. You don't have to say it. And then she climbed over and gave me a kiss. I was like, like, and you know, I feel the emotion. It was a year ago, and I feel that, but I thought her level of awareness, and I guess I could take a little credit in that she understood that because of the amount of times previously when those things would happen, I would within a few minutes go, that was me. So I went to say it, and it's like she knew. She was like, no, it's okay. I get it. I know you didn't mean that. She understands that's our dynamic, which felt really beautiful to think, oh, wow, like if that can be her, if she can orient the world that way, where someone reacts in a way and she can kind of just go, oh, I get it. There's something going on with you. That's okay.
That's incredible teaching, especially for a child of that age, to have that level of awareness. What do you think attributes to that? Was she always really precocious in her development and her understandings? Or is that something that's also been cultivated between all of you?
I think there's both there. I think both. When she was one of the times had ayahuasca, I think it was the third time. Then it really showed me how she was going to play a role in some of the things that I would work on now, and how she would pick it up when she was older, and how she would interact with people in certain ways. And this was when she was 1, and then as things have unfolded, like so much of what I was shown then is pretty right. And you know, incredibly, the first time we did a podcast, I'd made some reels, and one of them you were talking about consciousness, and one of the images I overlaid was what I would say maybe a lot of people might experience in in a psychedelic journey. And I was showing her this reel, and it got to that point, and she bolted out of her seat and she went, "Is that heaven?" And I thought, wow, because I mean, most people, what would they think heaven was? They'd think like, the clouds, the pearly gates. That's the imagery that most people have, right? And I'd not had any conversations with her around that, but she'd seen this image that I would say has been familiar for me when I've been deep in journey, and how she shot forward and pointed that out. I was like, huh, that's interesting. And she's naturally inquisitive around it. Like, she, like I said, she asks about God, and she says she called me. Her mum had to call me, and she was crying one time, and she was like, "Can you speak to Darcy, please? We're having this conversation about." She brought up God again, and I said it's not real, and she's crying. I said, "Why are you crying?" She went, "Mum is saying God isn't real. I know God is real. I can feel God in me." So and it's not just this understanding. And what's funny is I don't talk to her a lot about it. So there's something going on for her where she has some felt connection, and this, I know, ability to kind of perceive things and see things in a certain way. So who knows what was going on for her in past lives?
I think as we go on, we'll find out for sure. I love this idea, though, of the sacred geometry, patterns, lights, colors, fractals being described as heaven. When I've been in the visionary spaces, I've found that to be heaven. I've thought to myself, wow, this is heaven. Yeah. It's heavenly. It feels heaven. It has a vibe associated with it that's so comfortable and pleasant and incredible. What an amazing state of consciousness to be in. Have you had experiences like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, both in ayahuasca and DMT. And where it just felt like, just heavenly. It was like, oh, this is heaven. That was my experience, really. And then how that translated to me was, and I can experience that here. Like I can enter into that state here. But yeah, she jumped out of her seat and pointed it out like she remembered it. That's what it was. It's like she remembered that. It was pretty wild.
That's interesting. Yeah. I wonder how much of I associate all of that stuff to our consciousness. Right? I think
Mm.
that's like the nature of the patterning of our consciousness itself. And I think that's where we come from. And so to me, that is heaven. If you take the story that, you know, like our souls are seated in heaven and the other stories about where else they go, whatever, but not getting into that part of those stories, just, you know, kind of heaven, of God, of source, whatever, and then come into the material plane to be here of existence. That's really how I feel of it. And when I get into the sacred plants and the beauty of that expression of consciousness, that's what it always relates to, is that nature of heaven. Kind of in association with that, as we're going through this list of things that matter, we've talked about God mattering and self mattering and the relationships we have with other mattering. What is success for you, and how does that fit into any kind of mattering of our existence?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd say I've really changed my answer on that recently. And it actually is to be open to what feels most right, most alive, and most true to me in this moment, and to be open to that. And I feel like if I'm doing that on a daily basis, I'm being successful. Through doing that, I find a state of peace, of relaxation, of joy, of enjoyment, of fun, of play. I feel like that becomes more of my experience of thinking it has to be this thing in this way. By being more open to receive wisdom, to receive guidance, and just to be open to how life shows up, and to then move forward from that place, feeling right, true, aligns. I guess like integrity and is something that's important to me. So if it feels right and it feels true, it feels aligned, then I feel like I'm being successful. And it feels so much more process oriented rather than outcome oriented.
Hmm.
I think for so many people, success is based on the outcome. But I mean, what does that even mean? Like any outcome that we might experience is only a short term outcome for a longer term process that is life. So I guess I've just arrived at this place that if I can make everything about the process all throughout my life, and it feels that way, then I would have experienced a successful life. At least that's what feels true now.
Yeah, success is it's tough to pin down, and it seems often presented in this transactional nature, like you say, outcome oriented only. And you know, I wonder, in a world that's so task oriented now, so digitally oriented, so broken down into little pieces over and over and over again that we have to do, where people find deep meaning and what they can do to try to find a deeper meaning in the nature of those experiences. And something I like to share with people is to set up their lives to be successful. And to me, the success represents in that the ability to have a positive outcome for what somebody's attempting to do. But I really love the idea that it comes from that integral alignment within somebody. How for you do you find that integral alignment, you know, to find that success and to get into that space? What do you actually do? If there are any techniques, anything you could share with anybody listening to actually find that? That's such a powerful definition of success.
Yeah, I would say as a regular practice, I sit and I write. That's how I receive. I've got my mystical journal over here, and I will actually often ask, and I've got no idea what I'm going to write. Literally no idea, and then I'll just start writing, and it feels like a level of guidance that I'm not saying everyone will be able to maybe do that in the same way, but just sitting and making time and space to go into me and to be in that inquiry of what does it mean to be me today, and not to assume that I know what that is necessarily, because we're always evolving. So just to have those regular check-ins of what does it mean to be me, what feels alive in me, what feels right in me, what feels true in me. And I think if we really go to the feeling and not the thinking, we can feel, and this is maybe what helps us align with what matters. I can feel what matters to me. For me, I feel an opening in my body, which really says yes.
Hmm.
Yes. And I can feel a very subtle no. And that really helps. And, today it was, I wanted to watch last night's UFC. I wanted to do some reels. I've been intimate with my beloved. I've been to the gym. I've had some good food. I've had a conversation with you. Is this a successful day? Fuck yeah. Like, it is. It's a great day. And it's like, has there been huge outcomes out of today? No. But it's been productive and I've enjoyed it. And it's just felt well balanced. And tomorrow is a Monday and I'll be maybe more focused on productivity throughout my Monday. But even then I'll sit down and I'll go in and I'll say, okay, what things feel like they need the most attention today? What feels right that they need, and then just developing that relationship where I understand my intuitive feeling to what is yes, and being able to trust that, because whenever I do, it always tends to lead to the right place. I'll give you a quick example. I think it was 3 weeks ago on a Sunday. I had no intention of going to the gym, zero, and I felt in me, and it felt like a voice. It was go to the gym. And then as I got in my car, I was shown, basically it was around, there's a client, there's someone who wants to become a client. I just felt this intuitively. So I was like, okay, went to the gym. I was chatting to someone about coaching, the coaching that I do, and that was that. Carried on going, finished up, was about to go in the spa. Then I was in the locker room and there was a guy who said, hey, do you do coaching? And he's like, yeah, I heard you talking in the sauna the other day and the things you were saying were really profound and like they really landed with me. And, anyway, that guy became like a private client. It was like a 7K kind of price point client, happened like that. And it was, I, and that was me being open to this intuitive sense of something I wasn't planning on doing that day, but being open to it. And now we could call it coincidence, but it's something.
Yeah, it's a great thing to follow. On that note, how do people find you? How do they get in touch with you if they want your coaching and resonate with what we're talking about? What's the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, the best way to get in touch is Instagram, Sabri Gazail. That's the best way to get in touch. I also have Lost and Found podcast on YouTube and all the podcast places. And I mainly do group coaching now. I do some one-to-one, kind of like higher price point, but I really get very invested in the people I work with and really give them a lot of time and attention. And yeah, it's my absolute delight and honor, and I feel like it's the time where I really maybe get to most be me. When I talk about mission, purpose, and how I show up to the world, this feels so deeply aligned, and it matters so much to me. Um, so I really feel like I get to be the most of me in that kind of coaching environment.
That's incredible. Sabri, thank you so much for receiving that calling and listening to it and following this path and being part of the mission and being part of the positivity and solution of this world. So thank you so much for coming on the Blue Morpho podcast. It's always a pleasure. I look forward to many more conversations with you and just have an awesome rest of your day.
Thanks so much, brother. Much love.